Have you ever entered a room and felt without a word being spoken that you didn't belong, not because of what you did, not because you weren't qualified or capable, but because someone had already made up their mind who you were before you even got a chance to speak? That was the kind of quiet, heavy judgment dare Trisantos had become accustomed to, a young black neurologist at one of the nation's most elite hospitals. Andrew wasn't simply battling for his patients, he was battling to be seen, to be heard, to be believed. And then came the case that would alter everything. Mount Sinai Hospital, New York's jewel of medicine, had just been given a $4 million gift by one of America's most influential families and their darling daughter, Victoria Blackwood, young, rich, and in a coma after a fatal accident had been placed under Andre's care. But from the moment that he entered her room, it was obvious. They didn't believe he had a right to be there. Not the family, not the hospital administrator, not even some of the hospital staff who spoke in hushed tones when they thought no one was around. And yet, Andre remained. He watched. He listened. He treated Victoria with a quiet respect others ignored because he noticed something, small cues, subtle changes that others ignored, a flicker of an eye, a breath that didn't quite fit the rhythm, little things, but important things. He knew she was still there, even when the rest of the world had given up. Now, if you've ever had to prove yourself in a crowded room of people who didn't think you belonged, if you've ever been underestimated or forgotten, you already know the fire in Andre's belly. But what he didn't realize, what nobody knew, was that Victoria was awake. Stuck in her body, unable to move or talk, but awake and listening. Listening to every insult, listening to every doubt. Each time they wondered if someone like Andre would be trusted with someone like her. And what then? It's not the sort of tale you hear much, because it's not solely about medicine. It's about character, about what we do when no one is looking. And what then when someone who has been pushed around their entire life says, enough. It's a story about a young physician who had the courage to challenge the roles given to him, and a young woman who awoke to a world she didn't know, only to discover the one man that everyone else had second guessed was the only one who ever really saw her. It's a tale of quiet strength, of truth breaking through against the backdrop of power, privilege, and prejudice. You've paid in. And of what unfolds when two radically different lives cross each other in the most unlikely circumstances and alter the future for many others. So if you've ever asked yourself whether integrity still counts, whether holding out for your principles can still be the difference in a system that's intended to shut you up, then this is a tale you'll want to listen to, because this isn't merely about saving a life, it's about what it means to matter. Let's get started. Are you certain this young man should be taking care of our most vital patient? Doctor? Catherine Wellington's curt voice echoed down the fifth-floor hallway at Mount Sinai Hospital, carrying far enough that anyone within hearing would catch the words encompassing the young physician heading toward room 312. Dr. Anders Santos hesitated at the door. He slowed down and readjusted the stethoscope hung around his neck. At 27 years young, he was accustomed to these not-so-fine remarks. 3 years into residency at New York's finest hospital, Andre had already realized that his abilities would be questioned way ahead of anyone ever letting him demonstrate what he could do. Dr. Wellington, Andre stated, maintaining his cool and respectful tone, something he had learned by now. Victoria Blackwood has been with me for 2 weeks. Her vitals have stabilized remarkably since then. Catherine folded her arms, her icy blue eyes narrowing as she looked at Andre like he didn't belong. The Blackwood family gave $4 million for the new pediatric wing, she said sternly. We can't risk it. Andre knew precisely what she was referring to as risks. Since landing at Mount Sinai from a public university on a full scholarship, no less, he'd been handled like every patient he touched was a case study, like he needed to prove his right to be there again and again. Victoria Blackwood, who inherited one of the richest real estate dynasties in the nation, had lain in a coma for 4 months after a yachting accident. 25. She was the embodiment of privilege, blonde, wealthy, and living with a family that treated doctors like servants, particularly those who didn't quite fit their type. With all due respect, Yar. Wellington, Andre said, still calm, still composed. I trained in neurology at Johns Hopkins and specialized in head trauma. My record speaks for itself the moment he mentioned Johns Hopkins, one of the country's top medical programs. Dr. Wellington's expression faltered. It was always the same. Surprise, then a quiet backpedal, as if his achievements couldn't possibly measure up, even when they clearly did. Andre entered Victoria's private room. Morning light fell softly through upscale curtains, illuminating the unmoving form of the heiress. For 120 days, she had not responded, her body being kept alive by machinery. Daily bouquets of fresh flowers from the social society poured in, a constant supply of roses and orchids that filled the room with a scent of opulence. But Andre saw something that no one else did. Small flashes, minute-eye twitches, minimal shifting in her respiratory pattern, infinitesimal reactions to the simplest stimuli. He had taken meticulous notes, independent of the standard chart. His thesis research on change consciousness as part of his medical residency had provided him with knowledge that few of his peers enjoyed. "Good morning, Victoria," he said softly as he gently changed the bandage near her surgical site. "I know you're in there, and when you're ready to come back, I'll be right here." What Andre didn't know, what no one knew, was that Victoria had returned. For the past 3 weeks, she'd been conscious, trapped, hearing every word, every medical update, hearing every critical comment about the black physician they believed wasn't good enough for her. And for the first time in her very advantaged life, Victoria was experiencing what it was like to be judged for something she had not elected. She lay there, locked inside herself, and she heard it all, every doubting phrase, every discouraging word about the young black physician who was treating her. And although she was immobile, unable to speak, she felt each bite. In the meantime, Andre Santos moved about the room with measured calm. He tested reflexes, timed responses, and noticed neurological signs that all the other physicians had missed. But Victoria, awake but silently so, struggled with every last shred of will to let know she was in there. Her will was powerful, but it was as if some kind of invisible wall prevented her body from speaking to her mind. Then something extraordinary occurred. Tangent alert. If you're finding this so compelling, a story of justice, prejudice, and shared humanity, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what comes next, because one moment of wake up is about to turn everything on its head. Andre had long suspected that Victoria's condition was grittier and more optimistic than appearances. But even he wasn't ready for proof this quickly. As he scrutinized her pupil responses carefully, something suddenly jumped out at him. A series of movements, tiny but distinct, that suggested highly complicated brain activity well beyond what had been reported officially. "Interesting," he murmured, taking a furtive note in his compact black notebook. That notebook had been his constant companion since med school. It was stuffed with observations, research concepts, and patient observations, particularly things others rejected or overpassed. His Johns Hopkins experience, one through determination, 3 part-time jobs, and a full academic scholarship had taught him that greatness is frequently hidden in the mundane details. Just as he was preparing to run another test, the door burst open. "What do you think you're doing?" The harsh tone was that of Margaret Blackwood, Victoria's fierce mother. She was 60 and the epitome of elegance, but her voice broke like a whip. To her left was her son Richard, and naturally D.A. Wellington, all three gazing at Victoria with a combination of disapproval and suspicion as if it were their uniform. Andre stood up slowly. His hands stayed out where they could be seen, unclenching and resting still, a habit formed over years in case just such a situation arose. "You're accustomed to questioning before hearing. You learn to appear unthreatening, even in a lab coat. I was conducting a routine neurological examination, Mrs. Blackwood," he explained quietly. "Victoria is displaying some interesting signs I'd like to investigate further." Richard Blackwood approached, his well-shined shoes landing on the floor with the precision of gavel strikes. In his early 40s and accustomed to being in command, he gazed down at Andre with a smug smirk, signs the other doctors missed for some reason. He spat, voice full of sarcasm. Doctors with more experience. How handy. The irony brought Andre close to laughing. He had written 2 highly respected medical articles on changed states of consciousness, both in overseas publications. That kind of status was unheard of for a resident, but in this room, all of that did not count, not alongside inherited funds and shut minds. His respect, Andre started, maintaining Margaret's gaze as tightly as he was able without appearing aggressive. "My area of expertise is exactly in situations like Victoria's. Johns Hopkins is the #1 hospital in the country for neurology, and my thesis on that's enough. The family is entitled to determine who takes care of their daughter, and quite frankly, Dr. Unthikable's, maybe your time would be better spent on patients more appropriate to your level of expertise." The insult wasn't even thinly veiled. It clung in the air like heavy smoke, silent but unmissable. Andre knew precisely what she meant by suited. Not rich patients, not important ones, definitely not ones with surnames that could pay for a hospital wing. No, she meant the ones with less, with no influential parents to demand special treatment. The patients whose stories weren't deemed newsworthy. To others, like Dr. Wellington, Andre was perfectly suited for those patients with no multi-$1,000 insurance, no political clout, the ones no one else wanted to take on. That's what appropriate in their society meant. But what really stung Andrew wasn't their bias, it was knowing Victoria had heard it all. Her heart rate monitor had ticked ever so slightly, a tiny blip that most would never even see, but not Andrew. Not a person trained to see the subtle signals the body emits. It was just enough to verify what he had already started to suspect. Victoria was awake, perhaps not to full awareness, but enough to listen in on the bitter words, the whispered assumptions, the searing dismissals about the doctor who had never stopped believing in hair. Andre took his stethoscope off gently and turned towards Margaret Blackwood. His tone was firm and courteous, but with underlying steel. Very well, he replied. I'll talk to Dar Harrison about transferring the case. Then he hesitated and gazed Margaret straight in the face. But first, I want you to know something. Victoria has been exhibiting neurological signs that strongly point to a gradual return of consciousness. Signs that might not be evident to everyone, but they're there. Margaret furrowed her brow. What are you trying to say? I'm not implying anything, Andrew replied firmly. I'm telling you, based on my professional opinion, that Victoria may be more conscious than she appears, and if that's the case, she's been hearing everything said in this room. The silence that followed was almost unbearable. Margaret gazed at her daughter, her expression a blend of hope and something that appeared damn near like guilt. Even Richard, who had been smirking mere moments before, shifted his position and looked away. Is that even possible? Margaret asked, her voice gentler now. Handra nodded gravely. More than you'd imagine, patients in extended comas are frequently able to hear and comprehend what's going on around them long before they're able to move or communicate. That's why I always suggest families talk to their loved ones as if they were alert. What he did not say out loud was that he already had spent 2 whole weeks doing nothing else but discussing the pitfalls of being a doctor, his favorite classical composers, and even sharing his venting about working in an environment where prejudice was still rampant. He'd talked with her as if she counted because she did. Doctor. Wellington cleared her throat, obviously anxious to take back control of the conversation. Well, that's still just speculation, she said, forcing a polite smile. Dr. Harrison will assess the situation properly once he takes over the case. Andrew smiled back, but it didn't reach his eyes. Dr. Harrison, yes. The one who hasn't published a single study on neurology and whose most recent training on coma patients was 15 years ago. I'm sure Victoria will be in excellent hands. The comment was a subtle one, but a cruel one. Everyone in the room knew better. Harrison wasn't chosen because he was any good, but because he had a way with high society families. As the Blackwoods departed the room in stunned silence, Andrew took the final step to Victoria's bedside. He leaned in close to her and breathed softly in her ear, his words barely audible. If you can hear me, I want you to know something. I don't abandon people, not for pressure, not for politics, and certainly not due to prejudice, and more than that. I hope you remember this. When you awaken, the real strength doesn't lie in how much you have or how many people you can get to know you. It lies in how you treat the others, particularly the ones who can't speak up for themselves. What Andre didn't notice, what no one noticed, was the lone tear that rolled down Victoria's face. That one tear down Victoria's face wasn't emotion alone, it was movement. Her very first physical response in months, and it wasn't coincidental, for the first time in her life. She wasn't merely a name on a family foundation wall tablet. She was being noticed and judged not by her station, but by her person. And more than that, someone was fighting for her. Not because she was a Blackwood, but because she was a human being who counted. And as Andre packed up his stuff and took his last notes, something was brewing beneath the surface. In Victoria's mind, Andre's words were resonating. The anger she'd felt listening to the quiet and not so quiet racism. The unobtrusive strength he'd exerted throughout it all of it ignited something within her, a kind of mental wildfire that combination of anger and hope ignited. Her mind in ways no computer could have anticipated. Slowly, it began chipping away at the intangible wall between her mind and body. Her consciousness was becoming sharper, her will growing stronger, and that could be the key to restoring her, but it would not be in the way anyone hoped. See, what no one in the hospital realized, not even the Blackwoods, was that Andre wasn't just a brilliant young doctor navigating prejudice. He was a quiet strategist, someone who'd learned early on that you don't win arguments by shouting, you win by proving people wrong thoroughly, methodically, and without leaving a shred of doubt. 3 days after having been extracted from Victoria's case, Andre was still showing up for work like nothing had happened, composed, professional, concentrated, but backstage, something entirely different was building. In his own apartment, however, it was less a bedroom and more a war room. Laptops open on the table, notes tacked to the walls, medical reports sorted to the minute detail. Andre had collected everything, every detail, every neurological reaction Victoria had presented, and he was readying it for someone he trusted with his life. On the video conference screen came up the face of Dr. James Wilson, a retired Johns Hopkins neurology professor. This was no ordinary mentor. Wilson was the guy who had spotted a spark in a Bronx kid, got him a full scholarship, and walked him through the very same halls where the brightest minds in neurology trained. "Are you certain?" Wilson asked, reading over the data Andre had just presented. Andre gestured toward the screen, assured. Each data point, each trend, all of it is consistent based on her eye movements, heart rate variability, and micropupil responses. Victoria Blackwood has been awake at least 3 weeks, possibly longer. Wilson sat back, clearly shaken. "And you've recorded all of this? Everything?" Indra assured. "Video recordings, clocked monitor printouts, observation logs. I even monitored how her answers varied depending on who was present." He hesitated, his voice growing cold. "Particularly when individuals talked about me." Something Andre didn't share with his mentor was the more he delved into Victoria's medical history, the worse it got. And looking at her previous reports, he noticed discrepancies, hazardous ones. Dr. Harrison, the fellow who took his place, hadn't caught or simply disregarded important neurological findings. Worse, he'd left Victoria on drugs that could actually slow the recovery process, medications that may have been artificially keeping her unconscious. And at the hospital, it was fast deteriorating. Dr. Harrison had initiated a whole misdirected treatment plan, one based more on meeting family expectations than sound medical judgment. Meanwhile, Margaret Blackwood was getting anxious. She'd started pushing the medical staff for quicker fixes, more aggressive interventions designed to hurry up her daughter's recovery. But Andre understood the real situation. An inappropriate step at this time would have Victoria suffering brain damage that would never heal. "Dr. Harrison," Margaret Blackwood said, icy, cool during one of her frequent visits, her tone sharp with urgency. "They don't have much time." She towered at the foot of her daughter's bed like a CEO in a boardroom, not a fretful mother. "Victoria's been like this for months. Perhaps it's time we looked at more aggressive therapies." Pritchard, always the dutiful son and echo chamber, chimed in, "We can pay for the best. Perhaps it's time for experimental surgery, something to wake her up." Dr. Harrison, more concerned with placating the family than with helping the patient, started to seriously consider their risky proposals. "Well, there are some new procedures," he hedged. "They're not tried, but they might possibly stimulate brain function." Nobody in the room seemed to catch the subtle dip in Victoria's heart monitor, but she saw everything, trapped and still. But wiser than anybody knew, she heard the individuals who were allegedly fighting on her planned to risk her life, and for the first time, she saw how different Andre Santos was. His concern had been thoughtful, patient, respectful. This was control masquerading as desperation. That was when Andre realized he could wait no more. Now it was time to act, with assistance from Dear son and a small group of trusted friends at Johns Hopkins. He started constructing something daring. This would not be an under-the-radar internal grievance. It would be a wholesale exposure, public, factual, and inescapable. Not merely medical negligence, but prejudice and corruption infused into the hospital itself. One night, on the phone with his mentor, Andre outlined the plan. "James," he instructed, "I want you to call drawer Patricia Reeves at the State Medical Board and get in touch with that investigative news program, The Malpractice Show." Dr. Wilson flinched, taken aback. "That's a drastic step. Andre, the Blackwoods have influence. They'll come after your license, your career, everything." Andre didn't flinch. His voice dropped to something colder than Wilson had ever heard. "They might try, but I'm not going after their money. I'm going after their reputation. And when I'm done, they'll beg me to take Victoria's case again." What Andre had learned was worse than bad medicine. Hospital finance records, hidden in reams of administration files, spoke volumes. The Blackwoods had threatened the hospital to keep Victoria in a coma not for her medical condition, but to delay her inheritance. Margaret was employing her daughter's condain to hold on to control of the family empire. But Andre's plan wasn't all about demonstrating what they'd gotten wrong. It was about demonstrating to the world that Victoria remained in there and fighting. With his specialized training in neurology, Andre had started to mess around with minor modes of communication, tactile signals, pulsed lights, measured hand squeezes, things most physicians wouldn't even consider attempting, and Victoria had reacted. On his clandestine, after-dark visits arranged with the assistance of understanding nurses, Andre had established a rudimentary method of communication. Not flawless, but genuine. Yes and no, compliance and fear. "Victoria," he whispered one evening as he clasped her hand softly. They're going to insist on procedures that might damage you. I need you to have faith in me. I will not let that occur. Two soft squeezes of her hand, clear, certain she was in. The Harris no one had believed in was ready to battle with the very doctor that her family had attempted to eliminate. And the scheme, it was practically set. Within 72 hours, everything would come to a climax. That Thursday morning, as the Blackwood family gathered in Mount Sinai's main auditorium for yet another closed-door meeting with Dar Harrison, they had no idea what was about to hit them. This time, Andre wasn't just prepared, he was armed with the truth, backed by evidence, and no longer willing to be silent. And he wasn't alone. As Victoria lay in her hospital bed, still technically comatose, something strong was building within her. Driven by the injustice she'd overheard and the fierce generosity Andre had displayed to her, she was no longer merely staying alive. She was fighting back, not for herself, but for something greater. Because sometimes change doesn't come from vengeance, but from the unlikely partnership between two individuals who will not let ignorance prevail. At 9 a.m. on the dot, the meeting started. Dr. Harrison stood tall in front of the group, speaking to Margaret and Richard Blackwood as a car salesman would to a customer at the point of sale. After considering alternatives with several of the top experts, he asserted with a smile, I think experimental stimulation of the cerebral cortex might accelerate Victoria's recovery. Margaret nodded enthusiastically. At last, a doctor with action. How much longer do we have to wait for answers? She hardly had time to get the words out when the auditorium doors burst open, and in strode Donder Santos, but not alone. Standing beside him were three individuals who sent the room into a deep freeze. Patricia Reeves, a high-ranking official from the State Medical Board, cameraman for Medicine in Focus, a National Health Investigative Program, James Wilson, globally acclaimed neurologist and Andre's old mentor. Andre's tone was mild, but his presence crackled. I apologize for the intrusion, he said courteously, but his gaze held Harrison straight on. But I think you're about to sign off on a procedure that might kill Victoria Blackwood. Richard leapt to his feet, face flushed with rage. You don't belong here. You were taken off this case. Before Harrison could take one step further, Dar Reeves advanced, brandishing her official badge. Actually, she spoke icily, Dar Santos reported to us grave charges of medical negligence and possible malpractice. Neva right under state law to investigate at once. Harrison's eyes froze. His face turned white. His hands shook. This is preposterous, he stuttered. There is no evidence. This is defamation. Andre didn't waver. The smile he produced wasn't a warm one. It was a surgical one. I'll start with the recordings. Had now become the cautionary story of corruption and hubris. You know what really impresses me? Victoria remarked one afternoon, scanning the quarterly report from the Santos Blackwood Foundation. It's not so much that justice was served, it's that we helped change an entire system. Handra smiled, remembering those hard, long years, reproving himself again and again in each surgery, each conversation, each diagnosis. Today, however, was different. Everything. Today, young physicians from underrepresented groups were applying to Mount Sinai, not despite its history, but because of the future it now embodied. They arrived knowing they would be evaluated here on skill, enthusiasm, and integrity alone. The same hospital conference room in which Andre had once been publicly rejected now went by a new title, the Santos Mentorship Hall. It contained workshops, mentorship circles, and lectures for young medical professionals of all backgrounds. A plain bronze plaque hung on the wall that stated, competence has no color, gender, or last name. Dr. James Wilson, still sharp in his retirement and now an official advisor to the foundation, often said, in all my decades in medicine, I've never seen a transformation this complete. Not just in a hospital, but in hearts, minds, and purpose. And it was true. What had started as a single man's quiet act of courage for dignity and equality grew into a movement, a ripple that recast an institution, empowered a generation, and reminded the world that the greatest kind of power isn't found in legacy or money, but in the bravery to do what's right. Even when the world tells you you can't. Andre didn't merely beat prejudice, he redefined what it means to transcend it. In keynote addresses nationwide, he frequently told us, the best revenge isn't retaliation. It's building something so strong, so undeniable, that your oppressors can't tear it down. But most compelling of all was when Andre was invited to give the keynote speech at the National Congress of Neurology, the same conference where, years before, Dr. Harrison had been treated like royalty. This time, however, the room was different. Physicians who had previously discounted Andre now leaned forward with rapt attention, jotting down every word as if they were gold. Journalists flooded the aisles, hoping to glean wisdom from the man who had quietly, tenaciously transformed neurology in America. Real strength, Andre told the crowded auditorium, isn't discovered in taking people down. It's discovered in building bridges where people see walls. Every challenge that I have gone through has taught me that our best rebuke to prejudice is unshakable excellence. Not only in what we know, but in how we treat others, particularly when nobody's looking. From the front row, Victoria listened with pride, her eyes aglow. She had experienced the worst and seen the best. She had seen Andrew endure humiliation and transform it into healing, both for himself and for an entire system. He hadn't simply proven himself correct, he'd rewritten the rules. Now when young physicians from underprivileged backgrounds encounter discrimination, they don't cower, they don't leave. They ask a simple question: what would Dar Santos do? And the reply: work harder, study deeper, show up with more heart than anyone expects, be so good they can't ignore you. Because in the end, the best revenge isn't getting even, it's becoming a name they can't forget. A name they whisper in awe, a legacy they once tried to bury and now can't stop celebrating. If this tale of transformation, courage, and justice has touched something within you, be sure to subscribe to the channel. We share more true and inspiring stories, evidence that sometimes what appears to be defeat is merely the first step towards winning. And remember, he who laughs last, laughs loudest. Especially when that laughter rings out across hospital corridors that now save lives, because one man would not let prejudice pen his story. See that you allowed prejudice and politics blind your better judgment. And I see that if Dar Santos had not had the guts to confront all of you, I might be dead today. The room came to a standstill, then Darda. Reeves walked forward, striking the killing blow with measured composure. Due to this investigation, Tarkarandri Santos is hereby promoted to Department Head of Neurology, effective today. In addition, his research in altered states of consciousness will be entirely funded by the university. Margaret and Richard Blackwood rose and exited the auditorium in stunned silence, their empire falling apart behind them, reputations in tatters, bank accounts soon to be subject to federal investigation, and lawsuits already pending on the horizon. Harrison, obviously shattered, was ushered out by security, his license revoked indefinitely. As the cameras captured that last moment, Andre stood silently, his face unemotional but determined. This was no longer about revenge. It was about justice, utter, measured, and ruthlessly potent. But the biggest surprise had not yet come, for Victoria Blackwood, once considered a helpless Harris, was more than just a patient Andre had rescued. She was now his greatest ally, with ambitions as bold as his own. Together, they were going to shake and remake a broken system that had let so many down. Sometimes real power isn't about annihilating your opponents. It's about making them obsolete while you redefine the rules they thought they controlled. 6 months on, Mount Sinai Hospital was almost unrecognizable. The neurology unit under Andre had embraced radical procedures borrowed from his work on consciousness and coma awakenings. Dozens of patients who had once been written off as hopeless were now awake thanks to methods most hospitals had pooh-poohed as fringe or too cutting edge. Dr. Santos remarked a young resident while going around carrying a clipboard. We just admitted 5 new coma patients, transferred from other hospitals. All of them specifically asked for the Santos protocol. Andre smiled, surveying the scene. His department, once a fortress of nepotism and quiet bias, was now a hub of excellence, filled with doctors of every background and race, chosen solely for their skill and heart. The East Coast medical community, once skeptical of him, now viewed Mount Sinai's neurology wing as the gold standard. And beside him always was Victoria. She wasn't merely a partner, she was a force of nature. Nay, Devitt. They had established the Santos Blackwood Foundation for Medical Justice, a foundation that battled systemic discrimination in medical care and provided full scholarships to students from oppressed communities. Their first big case: an $8 million award to a Latino physician who'd been wrongly terminated because of racial prejudice, funds that came straight from the hospital that attempted to keep quiet about it. Victoria walked into Andre's office, her heels tapping on the shiny floors, a fat envelope clutched in her hand. Central Park spread out behind her. We just received word, she told him, her voice aglow. Harvard wants you to head their new Neurology Research Institute. $50 million in support, complete autonomy for your own lab. Andre smiled quietly. $50 million. Not bad for a kid who had to work 3 jobs just to make it through college. The irony was bittersweet. The very institutions that had doubted his value now pursued his name like the holy grail of contemporary neuroscience. In the meantime, the ex-Dar Harrison, his name was officially blacklisted. The investigation had revealed years of clandestine malpractice cases. His final foray into working at a country clinic flopped when someone Googled him and stumbled upon the Medicine in Focus expose. His career was lost, his reputation ashes, but Andre never boasted. He did not have to. Because the world had been altered, and this time he was the one wielding the scalpel, not only to heal, but to define the future. At age 55, Dr. Harrison was a shadow of his former self. Once ushered around the corridors of the world's best hospitals like royalty, he now walked through them as a medical device rep, just another face in the sea of people no one remembered. The same physicians who had nodded deferentially in the past now hardly recognized him, looking away with disdain as if he had a stigma nobody wished to be identified with. Margaret Blackwood's downfall was even more severe. The financial probe had revealed decades of tax evasion, and behind the scenes wheeling and dealing. Fines and legal fees took away almost half of the Blackwood wealth. Her erstwhile celebrity receptions and boardroom hegemony were now a thing of the past. Richard had fled abroad to escape prosecution, and Margaret spent her days in solitude within her opulent mansion, a palace that was now more like a jail cell. The Blackwood surname, formerly an emblem of social privilege and family wealth, had now become the cautionary story of corruption and hubris. "You know what really impresses me?" Victoria remarked one afternoon, scanning the quarterly report from the Santos Blackwood Foundation. "It's not so much that justice was served, it's that we helped change an entire system." Handra smiled, remembering those hard, long years, reproving himself again and again in each surgery, each conversation, each diagnosis. Today, however, was different. Everything. Today, young physicians from underrepresented groups were applying to Mount Sinai, not despite its history, but because of the future it now embodied. They arrived knowing they would be evaluated here on skill, enthusiasm, and integrity alone. The same hospital conference room in which Andre had once been publicly rejected now went by a new title, the Santos Mentorship Hall. It contained workshops, mentorship circles, and lectures for young medical professionals of all backgrounds. A plain bronze plaque hung on the wall that stated, "Competence has no color, gender, or last name." Dr. James Wilson, still sharp in his retirement and now an official advisor to the foundation, often said, "In all my decades in medicine, I've never seen a transformation this complete. Not just in a hospital, but in hearts, minds, and purpose." And it was true. What had started as a single man's quiet act of courage for dignity and equality grew into a movement, a ripple that recast an institution, empowered a generation, and reminded the world that the greatest kind of power isn't found in legacy or money, but in the bravery to do what's right, even when the world tells you you can't. Andre didn't merely beat prejudice, he redefined what it means to transcend it. In keynote addresses nationwide, he frequently told us, "The best revenge isn't retaliation. It's building something so strong, so undeniable, that your oppressors can't tear it down." But most compelling of all was when Andre was invited to give the keynote speech at the National Congress of Neurology, the same conference where, years before, Dr. Harrison had been treated like royalty. This time, however, the room was different. Physicians who had previously discounted Andre now leaned forward with rapt attention, jotting down every word as if they were gold. Journalists flooded the aisles, hoping to glean wisdom from the man who had quietly, tenaciously transformed neurology in America. Real strength, Andre told the crowded auditorium, isn't discovered in taking people down. It's discovered in building bridges where people see walls. Every challenge that I have gone through has taught me that our best rebuke to prejudice is unshakable excellence. Not only in what we know, but in how we treat others, particularly when nobody's looking. From the front row, Victoria listened with pride, her eyes aglow. She had experienced the worst and seen the best. She had seen Andre endure humiliation and transform it into healing, both for himself and for an entire system. He hadn't simply proven himself correct, he'd rewritten the rules. Now when young physicians from underprivileged backgrounds encounter discrimination, they don't cower, they don't leave. They ask a simple question, what would Dar Santos do? And the reply, work harder, study deeper, show up with more heart than anyone expects, be so good they can't ignore you. Because in the end, the best revenge isn't getting even, it's becoming a name they can't forget. A name they whisper in awe, a legacy they once tried to bury and now can't stop celebrating. If this tale of transformation, courage, and justice has touched something within you, be sure to subscribe to the channel. We share more true and inspiring stories, evidence that sometimes what appears to be defeat is merely the first step towards winning. And remember, he who laughs last, laughs loudest. Especially when that laughter rings out across hospital corridors that now save lives, because one man would not let prejudice pen his story.